My name is Heather Williams. I'm 34, a real estate broker based in Chicago, and I've spent over a decade helping people secure their forever homes. Ironically, the residence I safeguarded for years, my childhood sanctuary, was gifted to someone else behind my back. I'd been the one paying the mortgage month after month, preserving the roof over my parents' heads. Then, on the day of my sister Melissa's wedding, my father stood at the microphone and declared they were handing over the family home as her matrimonial present. Time slowed. I felt the blood drain from my face, fingers tightening around the stem of my champagne flute, before I unravel everything that followed, the betrayal, the deception, and how I reclaimed control. Go ahead and let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit the like button and subscribe if you've ever poured your heart into helping family only to be cast aside. Our modest two-story house on Maple Street, nestled in a quiet corner of suburban Chicago, wasn't flashy. But it had been the heartbeat of our lives. Navy blue shutters, a wraparound porch, and a patchy lawn we all once played on. It stood for consistency, memories, love, at least that's what I believed. My dad, Richard, managed spreadsheets and tax audits at a regional accounting office. My mom, Diane, wrangled third graders and decorated bulletin boards in a nearby elementary school. Our rhythm rarely changed: spaghetti every Sunday, sparklers on the 4th of July, and the same worn tree topper every December. Melissa, my younger sister, entered the picture when I was 5. From her very first steps, there was an invisible spotlight that seemed to follow her. I brushed off the imbalance at first, assumed it was typical youngest child treatment. Until my 10th birthday. I'd requested a sleepover party. It was downsized to just 2 friends because money's tight. 3 months later, Melissa's 5th birthday exploded with a rented bounce castle, face painting station, and a class-wide invitation. It didn't stop there. When I needed orthodontic work, my parents told me to wait a year for better insurance coverage. Melissa? Hers were installed the moment her dentist suggested it. At 16, I got a stack of driver's ed vouchers. Melissa's sweet 16 came with keys to a second-hand but well-kept Honda. I swallowed the disparity and justified it. Maybe the budget had improved, maybe timing was better. Or maybe they truly believed she needed extra support. You've always been the self-sufficient one, they said often, like it was a compliment. But my so-called independence wasn't a gift, it was built from necessity. By the time high school rolled around, I had a clear understanding: if I wanted anything, I had to hustle. Babysitting gigs at 14, cashier shifts at the grocery store by 16, and every summer and holiday in college was spent working double shifts just to keep my tuition paid. I attended State University on a partial scholarship, cobbling together 3 jobs to cover the rest. My parents pitched in just enough to say they helped, about $1,500 per term. Melissa, on the other hand, attended an expensive private liberal arts school. Tuition, dorm fees, meal plan, all covered. She's not cut out for the debt, they said. You're stronger. You'll manage. Still, I loved them. Deep down, I kept believing this was just how our family worked. So I buried the resentment and focused on creating a life of my own. I majored in business and zeroed in on real estate. Graduating in 2008 meant entering a housing market in chaos. The financial crash had emptied offices and flooded the job pool with desperate applicants. Still, I didn't flinch. I accepted a front desk position at a small realty office and studied for my license every night. I lived in a crumbling shoebox studio. My car stalled in winter and overheated in summer. Dinner rotated between oatmeal and instant noodles. My first year netted 2 modest closings, barely enough to cover my rent. My parents? They offered leftovers and unsolicited advice. Maybe it's time to find something more stable, my dad hinted once. I ignored him. I wasn't just determined, I was anchored in purpose. Year 3 changed everything. A wealthy widow wanted help downsizing from her lakefront property. I handled the listing with meticulous care. That sale sparked referrals, and soon I was the go-to agent for high-end properties along the Gold Coast. At 28, I upgraded to a contemporary downtown loft, drove a reliable crossover, and was finally being taken seriously in my field. Meanwhile, Melissa floated from one endeavor to the next. After graduating with a degree in art history, she briefly interned at a gallery before deciding it drained her soul. She tried being a barista, then dabbled in personal assisting, and finally landed as a part-time yoga instructor at an exclusive studio. Despite minimal hours and spotty paychecks, her lifestyle remained comfortably indulgent: brunches, massages, weekend escapes, and designer clothes. She had a lifeline: my parents. They continued footing her phone bills, covering rent shortfalls, and bailing her out of whatever latest crisis she found herself in. I often reminded myself not to judge. We were different. I chose to climb, she floated. And our parents? They made their choices, too. Over the years, I observed the patterns, especially during holidays, but held my tongue, thinking reality would eventually nudge Melissa into responsibility. That moment never arrived. Instead, the first real test of our family's resilience appeared unexpectedly. One quiet Thursday evening, my phone lit up with a call from Dad. His tone, usually steady and upbeat, sounded fragile. At 58, he'd just been caught in a corporate layoff, part of a firm-wide restructuring that left him unemployed for the first time in over 3 decades. A severance check would tide them over for maybe half a year. At the same time, Mom received a difficult medical diagnosis, rheumatoid arthritis, requiring treatment not fully covered by her school benefits. "We're holding up," Dad insisted during our weekly chats. But his fatigue seeped through every word. 3 months later, I visited on a Sunday afternoon and joined my mother in the backyard to admire her rose bushes. While inside grabbing lemonade, I spotted unopened envelopes on the counter, final notices from the mortgage company and utility providers. When I asked about them, their facade cracked. Shame clouded their expressions. They confessed they'd fallen behind on monthly obligations. Dad promised it was only a temporary situation, that he'd find another role soon, but accounting jobs for aging professionals weren't in high demand. Meanwhile, Mom's prescriptions and specialist visits kept piling up bills. I barely slept that night, mind racing through possibilities. By morning, I had my answer. I offered to take over their mortgage and cover medical expenses not paid for by insurance. Their relief was immediate and profound. "You're saving the home you grew up in," Mom said tearfully. "It'll come back to you one day. We'll never forget what you're doing." That gesture, meant as a short-term fix, gradually morphed into something indefinite. Dad eventually picked up occasional consulting assignments, but the pay was inconsistent and came without benefits. Mom reduced her school hours to preserve her health. Each month, I deposited funds into their account: mortgage, groceries, electricity. I even handled minor repairs around the property and chauffeured them to doctor appointments. It was demanding, but I never hesitated. They were my parents. Helping them felt natural. What didn't feel natural was Melissa's complete detachment. Her lifestyle remained untouched by our parents' growing dependence. Her appearances at family events dwindled as she dove deeper into yoga retreats and mindfulness workshops. When she did swing by for Thanksgiving or birthdays, she brought artisan candles or essential oils as presents, nice gestures, but far from meaningful support. If she ever suspected I was footing the bills, she never acknowledged it. Not a word then. Everything shifted when she crossed paths with Brandon Taylor. It happened at a high-profile charity function hosted by one of her affluent yoga clients. Brandon, heir to a family that owned a network of luxury car dealerships throughout the Midwest, became smitten with Melissa almost instantly. Her carefree charm and ethereal beauty pulled him in. Their relationship escalated quickly. Instagram feeds filled with photos of candlelit dinners, snapshots aboard his family's private jet, and selfies from courtside seats at Bulls games. "He's not like the others," Mom gushed over tea one day. "So mature. From such an established family." Her excitement was palpable. Suddenly, their energy returned. They accompanied Melissa on shopping sprees, prepped elaborate dinners when Brandon came over, even repainted the guest bedroom for his comfort. The financial stress they'd been buried under just months ago seemed to evaporate when Melissa's engagement became the center of attention. Within half a year, Brandon proposed with a diamond so large it looked like it belonged on a billboard. The ring alone probably cost more than I'd paid toward their mortgage that entire year. The announcement sent everyone into a whirlwind. Wedding planning consumed all conversation. Venue tours, dress fittings, guest lists, every detail became the focal point of family life. The engagement party, hosted at the Taylors' lavish country club, was the first event that truly made me feel like an outsider in my own family. Situated on a sprawling estate, the venue typically welcomed politicians and socialites. The manicured lawns, marble lobby, and oil paintings lining the walls made me feel as though I'd walked into a different universe. Yet somehow, my parents looked completely at ease. They exchanged pleasantries with Brandon's relatives like seasoned pros. Weaving through the crowd with practiced charm. I had squeezed the celebration between back-to-back showings and arrived alone. Though my black sheath dress usually made a statement during closings and client meetings, here it felt modest, almost underdressed, amid the parade of couture gowns and tailored tuxedos. I made my way through the crowd until I spotted Mom, laughing with a group of unfamiliar women. Her cheeks were pink with champagne, her entire demeanor practically glowing. "Oh, Heather, finally!" she exclaimed, waving me over. As I approached, I overheard her speaking animatedly. "The wedding gift is going to be unforgettable," she told the group. "Something they can build their whole future on." The women all murmured an approval before drifting away. "What gift?" I asked casually once we were alone. Her response was breezy. Just some possibilities we're considering. Nothing firm yet. Did you try the hors d'oeuvres? The crab cakes are out of this world. It was an obvious deflection. But I didn't push. Throughout the evening, I observed whispered exchanges between my parents and Brandon's family. Nods, smiles, handshakes. Something significant was unfolding, and it was clear. I wasn't part of the conversation. 2 weeks had barely passed since the engagement gala when Dad reached out again. His tone was casual, even upbeat. Think you could bump your contribution for a bit? He asked. The roof's looking rough. We've got someone coming by for an estimate. Should take care of it before the snow starts falling. Without a second thought, I wired over $2,000 more than usual. Curious, I decided to swing by that Saturday. But instead of ladders, tarps, or any trace of construction prep, I walked into a scene straight from a bridal boutique. Mom and Melissa were lounging in the living room, flipping through stacks of magazines, comparing satin samples, and sipping from a half-empty bottle of pink bubbly. We're just brainstorming, Mom chirped, sweeping the mess into a nearby tote. Nothing final. But the open binder on the coffee table told a different story, page after page of catering invoices that looked more like 5-star restaurant bills than wedding menus. Trying to keep things diplomatic, I brought up the supposed home repairs. I thought the roof was a concern. My question was met with a defensive frown. This is Melissa's once-in-a-lifetime event, Mom snapped. We've been saving for this for years. I raised an eyebrow. Savings? I asked. Given how intimately I understood their budget, the term felt creative. You wouldn't understand, Dad cut in from his recliner. Some milestones deserve a little sacrifice. That conversation left a sour taste. The following week, I vented my frustrations over lunch with Rachel, my best friend since college. Pushing arugula around my plate, I sighed, am I overreacting? Here? I mean, technically it's their decision how they spend. Rachel's expression darkened. Except it's not just their income, right? You've been the lifeline keeping them afloat. Has either of them even discussed paying you back? I shook my head. I never asked for repayment. That wasn't the point. But I didn't expect them to fund a wedding with money I thought was going toward basics. Rachel tapped her glass thoughtfully. You might be unintentionally enabling them. Maybe it's time to reconsider how involved you want to be. She was right, and I knew it. But drawing lines with my parents felt like betrayal. They'd given me everything growing up. Withdrawing support now? That wasn't me. As the months rolled on, the contradictions became impossible to ignore. They declined my invitation to dinner at a modest new bistro, not in the budget right now, Dad had said, only for me to see engagement photos on Instagram 2 days later, professionally shot at a luxurious lakefront resort. Mom canceled physical therapy citing high copays, then raved about the tailor working on her custom gown for the big day. Even more hurtful were the increasing exclusions. Bridal shower? I found out about it from Melissa's story. Cake tastings? Venue visits? Apparently, I was too busy to be bothered. All the while, I kept transferring funds, mortgage, utilities, medication copays. Each month's support hovered near $3,000. It added up fast. Over 5 years, I had funneled more than $160,000 into the home I'd grown up in, money I had once intended for investing in a rental property. A tangible return on years of hard work. Roughly 6 months before the ceremony, I dropped by to hand-deliver Mom's birthday present. The driveway was empty, but the front windows glowed with lamplight. I unlocked the door with my key and stepped into a quiet foyer. Distant voices hushed abruptly as I approached the dining room. There sat my parents and an older man in a charcoal suit, surrounded by documents spread across the table. Heather. Mom stood quickly, shuffling the papers into a folder. We weren't expecting you. I brought your gift, I said, placing the neatly wrapped box on the side table. This is Mr. Patterson, Dad said, his tone slightly guarded. Our attorney. Just going over some estate logistics. Mr. Patterson offered a polite nod, then disappeared into professional silence. Mom ushered me into the kitchen, suddenly obsessed with the coffee maker. She pulled mugs from the cabinet, wiped spotless counters, adjusted a kitchen towel unnecessarily. Everything all right? I asked. You're not being sued or something, right? Of course not, she replied too quickly. We're just organizing legal stuff. You know, at our age it's smart to keep everything in order. Before I could question further, Dad strolled in, smiling like he'd won a raffle. Good news, he announced. Pretty soon, the house won't be your concern anymore. My pulse quickened. What does that mean? I asked, careful to keep my voice steady. We're making things easier, he replied vaguely. You don't need to worry. They changed the subject, talking about neighborhood gossip, my recent listings, Melissa's upcoming bachelorette weekend. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I was missing something critical, and they were keeping it from me. Melissa's wedding unfolded on a cloudless Saturday in June. The Palmer House in downtown Chicago looked like a movie set, towering floral installations, candlelit walkways, and chandeliers so opulent they could have lit a palace. I'd been at the venue since sunrise, wrangling with stylists, photographers, and bridesmaids trying not to spill mimosas on silk robes. Melissa, of course, was in full meltdown mode over the most minor imperfections. "The champagne is lukewarm," she cried as I fluffed her veil. "And those are cream roses, not ivory. Why can't anyone follow instructions?" I forced a smile and adjusted her train, remembering the quiet plea Mom had whispered to me hours earlier. "Please, Heather. Make this perfect for her. It's the most important day of her life." And I had tried. I truly had. But something told me my role in this family fairy tale was coming to an end, and I was the only one who didn't know it. Yet I popped champagne, settled squabbles among bridesmaids, and tracked down the flustered planner to resolve the urgent floral fiasco. Apparently, there's a world of difference between ivory and cream petals. Throughout the day, I wore a smile so fixed it felt painted on, all while mentally calculating the cost of every gilded extravagance around us. The ceremony was flawless. Melissa looked radiant in her couture dress, and Brandon's expression, as she walked down the aisle, could have melted stone. My parents sat proudly in the front row, Mom dabbing her eyes with lace-trimmed linen, Dad grinning like a man who'd won the lottery. To outside observers, we were the quintessential close-knit American family savoring a precious milestone. At the reception, I took my seat at the designated table, making polite conversation with Brandon's extended relatives while sipping a single glass of champagne. I needed my mind clear, my senses alert. Something in the air told me a revelation was approaching. During cocktail hour, I noticed my parents huddled near the bar with Brandon's mother and father, exchanging knowing glances, low murmurs, and enthusiastic nods. I could feel it coming. A twist. A finale. A performance they'd orchestrated without me. Following the entree, my father stood and tapped his fork against his glass. Conversation dwindled, and the ballroom grew still. His speech began warmly, about Melissa's transformation from precocious toddler to poised young woman. He spoke of tradition, foundation, and the honor of supporting the next generation's journey. Then came the announcement. "That's why," he said, voice trembling. "For effect, your mother and I are gifting you our home. The one you grew up in, filled with love, memories, laughter. It now belongs to you and Brandon, to build your life together." The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. I watched people turn toward Melissa with admiration as she burst into dramatic tears, gripping Brandon's sleeve like a starlet accepting an award. My mother smiled through her own emotional display, receiving hugs and praise from well-wishers. I remained still. In my hand, the flute trembled slightly, half full with bubbles I hadn't tasted. 5 years of steady deposits. 60 months of mortgage coverage. Thousands in additional costs for upkeep, insurance, roof repairs, and utility bills, all vanished in one grand gesture. No consultation. No warning. Not a single acknowledgement of my role in maintaining the very roof they had just handed over like a party favor. Images spiraled through my thoughts. Dad's grateful words when I offered to help, Mom's tears when I promised to shoulder their debt, weekends spent repairing chipped paint, trimming hedges, tightening faucets. I'd been told, that this house was my future, my reward, my inheritance. Melissa had never scrubbed a baseboard or paid a single utility. She showed up for turkey dinners and Easter brunches. Yet she now owned the bricks I'd fought to keep standing. I endured the evening with mechanical precision. Toasts, staged smiles, photo sessions, I delivered all the required lines. When Melissa threw her arms around me and squealed, "Can you believe it? The house is ours." I hugged her back, my expression unreadable. As the dancing began and the guests dispersed, I slipped away. Quietly. Unnoticed. Instead of heading to my apartment, I drove to what I once believed would be mine, the house I kept afloat for half a decade. It looked serene in the moonlight. Familiar, but colder now. I parked along the curb and waited, knowing my parents would swing by to change before heading to their suite downtown. Sure enough, just after midnight, their car rolled into the drive. They climbed out, still dressed in formal wear, visibly surprised to find my vehicle. I exited, meeting them on the walkway. "Heather? What are you doing here?" Mom asked, visibly flustered. Her clutch slipped slightly in her hand. "We need to talk," I replied, stepping past them and entering the place I used to consider home. The living room was still draped in wedding decor, framed engagement photos, unopened gifts, floral centerpieces reused from the reception. I sat, facing them across the coffee table. "How could you give that house away without ever mentioning it to me?" I asked, my voice level but burning. Dad loosened his tie, gaze drifting toward the fireplace. It's ours, Heather. We appreciated the support during our rough patch, but legally, the property's in our name. And the checks I sent every month for 5 years? The invoices for the new shingles? The property taxes I covered when things were tight, those don't count. You chose to help, Mom cut in, her tone unexpectedly cold. No one forced you. That was your decision. You promised it was an investment in my future. I shot back. You said it would be mine one day. Things change, Dad murmured. Melissa and Brandon need a proper home. They can't afford anything close to this neighborhood on their own. And I can? I asked, incredulous. I've sacrificed every financial milestone I had to keep this place afloat. You're established, Mom said with a shrug. You've got your place, your career. Melissa's starting from scratch. That conversation unraveled every illusion I'd clung to. They revealed they'd transferred ownership of the house to Melissa and Brandon months ago, explaining the lawyer's visit I had stumbled upon. The final mortgage payment had been covered with funds I'd sent specifically for medical costs and roof maintenance, around $12,000 in total. No discussion. No heads up, the part that broke me wasn't just the deception, it was the dismissal. My financial sacrifices were reframed as charity. Voluntary acts they had never requested. When I mentioned the full amount I'd contributed over the years, $160,000, Dad actually smirked. That's an exaggeration. Families help each other. My father's voice rang with practiced finality. Funny, I said, collecting my handbag, it seems that only applies when the one needing help is Melissa. Without another word, I stepped outside and drove home, tears streaking silently down my face. Hurt and fury battled inside me like two storms clashing midair. The trust one had placed in my parents, the foundation I had believed was mutual, respectful, and sincere, was now revealed as illusion. To them, I hadn't been a daughter of equal standing. I was the dependable one. The one who didn't require support. The one expected to give, not receive. That evening, curled beneath a blanket on my sofa, Chicago skyline sparkling through rain-blurred windows, I began rethinking everything. Every assumption about my parents' intentions. Every memory reframed under a harsher light. For decades, I had operated under the belief that if I worked hard, was generous, and didn't complain, fairness would eventually balance the scales. The week after the wedding, I immersed myself in back-to-back showings and jam-packed weekends filled with open houses and appraisals. I ignored incoming calls. My parents' attempts at contact came daily at first, then sporadically, voicemails shifting from worry to irritation. Melissa sent one chirpy text, "Thanks for being part of my day, sparkling heart." Not a single reference to the property. I answered. No one. My focus sharpened at work. I took every difficult listing and inconvenient appointment. When colleagues asked why I was suddenly working like someone with a mortgage to cover on a penthouse, I joked about planning a luxury escape to Italy. In truth, every property I stepped into triggered memories of a house I had rescued for years, only for it to be handed away without warning. But nights were long. The quiet was heavier than usual. Instead of rest, I tossed under weighted sheets, calculating all I had sacrificed. The condo I didn't purchase. The business courses I delayed. The IRA contributions I skipped. All to funnel stability into a household I mistakenly believed would one day be mine. One night around 2 a.m., I opened a blank spreadsheet and began entering figures. Mortgage installments. Insurance premiums. Maintenance and repair receipts. Grocery store runs. Doctor visits. Utility bills. Every dime traced back to a line. The total? Over $165,000 spanning 5 years. Staring at that number, I understood it wasn't just money, it was time, trust, and opportunity lost. I booked a consultation with Samantha Ford, a financial advisor referred by a colleague. In her downtown office, she examined the figures while taking notes on a legal pad. Her expression never wavered, but her line of questioning revealed her conclusions. Was there a written contract or any documentation tying your contributions to a future claim? No, I replied, feeling exposed. It was all verbal. A family promise. They said repeatedly the house would eventually be mine. She nodded, flipping through the spreadsheet. Unfortunately, without anything binding, we're in murky territory. A lawsuit for unjust enrichment or oral agreement is possible but emotionally grueling and expensive. If you do pursue legal action, it might take years and bring personal tolls that outweigh the financial gain. I leaned back, unsure what I even wanted. Justice? Closure? What would you recommend? Stop any remaining financial assistance. Immediately, she said with firm kindness. Document your boundaries clearly. And then decide what version of a relationship, if any, you want moving forward. But it needs to be one where your resources, emotional and monetary, are protected. That evening, I opened a fresh email draft. No emotion. No sentiment. Just facts. I itemized every financial contribution I had made. Line by line. I stated my understanding of the verbal agreement we had maintained. And I formally declared the immediate and permanent end to all financial involvement. My tone was professional. Detached. Final. Their response came hours later. An epic wall of text, mostly from my mother. She moved between guilt-tripping and justification with dizzying speed. Melissa needed help. I was secure. Real families didn't keep score. I was being ungrateful. And selfish. After all they'd done to raise me. My father added a paragraph at the end, disappointed by what he called my transactional view of familial love. Not once did either of them acknowledge the deception. Not one line addressed the massive financial contributions I had made. No offer to compensate. Not even regret. Their words confirmed what I already knew. If I hadn't drawn this line, nothing would have changed. While I rebuilt my boundaries, Melissa and Brandon returned from their Bali honeymoon and moved in immediately. Her Instagram became a highlight reel of transformation, the kitchen gutted, my mother's rose garden dug up to make room for a hot tub, the hand-drawn growth chart on the laundry wall painted over like it had never existed. Each glossy photo was another wound. One more piece of my connection to that home, scrubbed away as if it had never been real. The message that hurt the most arrived 3 weeks post-wedding. A chipper text from Melissa, complete with smiling emojis and photos attached. Redoing your old room. Come see it before the demo team starts. I stared at the screen, numb. That space had once been a reflection of me, posters, bookshelves, the desk where I'd stayed up studying for exams. Now it was just another canvas for their reinvention, another part of my history being erased. Rachel kept me grounded during that emotionally volatile time. We met weekly for coffee. Her presence provided the calm I couldn't find anywhere else. When I showed her the text, she silently took my phone, blocked my sister's number, and handed it back without a word. Not helpful right now, she said. She was right. Creating distance was the only way I could retain even a shred of peace. I upheld the silence into midsummer, pouring my energy into restructuring my finances and reconnecting with friends I had neglected while constantly bailing out my parents. I re-examined investment plans, replenished savings, and began exploring second property options again. For the first time in years, my future felt like mine. Then the silence shattered. A voicemail came from my dad's work number, the one I hadn't blocked. His voice was breezy, overly casual. Heather, hey. Just thinking about you. Your mom and I have been reevaluating our living situation. The house is, well, too much space for us now. Melissa and Brandon need their privacy. Let's chat soon. No mention of our fallout. No apology. Just a thinly veiled suggestion that they now needed new housing. I ignored the message, but the implication festered. Had they really gifted the property without considering where they'd go? Had they assumed they could reverse course if things got uncomfortable? 1 week later, another message followed, this time from my mother. Sweetheart, it's been ages. We're hosting a small dinner Sunday and really hope you can make it. We have some ideas for our next steps. Still no acknowledgement of what had passed between us. No recognition of the boundary I had drawn. Just another veiled attempt to reinsert themselves into my space and my resources. I declined the invitation via text, citing professional commitments. What followed was a string of increasingly suggestive texts, hints about rising rent prices, vague updates on apartment tours, casual remarks about needing somewhere peaceful. For Mom's health, the message became unmistakable. They expected to move into my lakeside cottage. That house, the only major asset I had acquired without their involvement, was my sanctuary. Tucked along the shores of a quiet Michigan lake. It was a 3-bedroom retreat I had purchased the year prior after landing several high-ticket commissions. I'd spent weekends painting, repairing, and decorating it by hand. The rental income covered lean months in real estate. More than that, it was my refuge from everything, family included. Once, before the betrayal, I had considered offering it to them as a retirement option. But now, their presumption that they were entitled to occupy it, without even asking, felt like yet another assault on my boundaries. Then came the inevitable doorstep confrontation. My doorman called one Tuesday evening to inform me that my parents had shown up unannounced. For a moment, I debated instructing him to turn them away. But avoidance wouldn't solve the issue. So, I relented. They arrived with carefully selected offerings, my mother's signature lasagna and a bottle of wine we'd once shared during a long-forgotten Christmas dinner. The nostalgia almost softened me, but not enough. I led them to the dining area and deliberately avoided offering to hang their coats. This wasn't a social reunion. After obligatory small talk about traffic and weather, my father cleared his throat. Heather, there's something we need to discuss, about where we're living. As you know, Melissa and Brandon need their privacy, my mother added quickly. They've asked us to vacate by the end of the month. 2 weeks, she emphasized, as though this was some sudden, shocking turn of events rather than the direct result of their own actions. We've explored rentals, my father continued. But everything in a decent area is outrageously priced. And your mom's health means we can't just settle for anything. They paused, waiting for me to fill in the blank. We were thinking, my mother finally said, about the lake house. It's empty most of the time. The air's fresh, and your father's doctor says less stress would do wonders for his blood pressure. I blinked. No apology. No reckoning. No regret. Just more entitlement, cloaked in medical necessity and familial guilt. As if nothing had transpired. The lake house? I repeated slowly, just until we figure things out. My dad said quickly. Maybe 6 months. A year at most. We'd avoid staying during rental season. You wouldn't even notice us. I pictured the space, the porch swing overlooking the water, the fireplace I had painstakingly restored, the hand-picked furniture. Every piece represented my independence and grit. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that I could build something. On my own terms. That won't be happening, I said, keeping my voice calm. Confusion clouded my mother's face. I'm sorry? You can't stay there, I repeated. It's not available. It's my property, funded with my work, and I'm not changing its use. Her tone shifted from polite to pressing. But it's sitting unused half the year. That doesn't make sense. It's not a matter of use, I said. It's about ownership. And boundaries. My father leaned forward, frowning. Heather, this is absurd. We're not strangers. We're your parents. Exactly. I replied. Which is why it's so shocking that you would hand over the house I supported for years, without so much as a conversation, and now ask for access to another one of my homes like it's owed to you. The silence was deafening. Then, without a hint of irony, my father said, after everything we've done for you. The audacity sliced through the air like a blade. After everything we've done for you? I echoed. What about what I did for you? For half a decade, I covered their mortgage, handled tax bills, fixed appliances, all under the verbal promise that I was building equity in the house I believed would one day be mine. A promise they shattered by handing it to Melissa, without a single conversation. That's ancient history, my mother replied with a wave of her hand. Let's focus on solutions. Here's one, I countered. Find an apartment you can afford. Like other adults do when they need housing. Their stunned expressions revealed how unaccustomed they were to being challenged. My father shifted gears, his tone slipping into the calm cadence he used while bargaining during property closings. Look, I know you're still frustrated about what happened with the house, he said. But this isn't the same. We're not requesting ownership of your lake cottage. Just a place to stay for a little while. I'll need time to think it over, I replied, rising from my chair to indicate the discussion was finished. I'll get back to you later this week. Once they left, I immediately called Rachel, who appeared half an hour later, flanked by our mutual friend Julia Stevens and carrying a bottle of tequila. As I recounted the events, their faces morphed from disbelief to outrage. The audacity, Rachel said, refilling our glasses. They hand over your financial contribution like a party favor and now expect keys to your second home? Julia nodded. Sounds familiar. My dad drained their savings funding my brother's failed startup, then tried to crash on my couch after his lease ended. These dynamics don't change until someone lays down non-negotiable boundaries. Rachel chimed in. Which is exactly what you need now. A wall, not a line in the sand, something solid with actual consequences. Together, we drafted my response. Direct yet composed, it acknowledged their circumstances without accepting accountability for solving them. I outlined 3 main points. They wouldn't be staying at my lake property, short or long term. Financial contributions from me were over. And any continued relationship would require a clear understanding of how deeply their decisions had harmed me, along with concrete efforts toward rebuilding trust. 3 days later, I invited them to meet at a neutral venue, a coffee shop located between our homes. I chose the setting to keep the atmosphere public, thereby minimizing theatrics. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a discreet corner table that offered semi-privacy. They walked in together. My mother glanced around nervously. My father carried his usual air of quiet confidence. I wore business attire and carried printed notes, signaling this was a formal meeting, not a heart-to-heart. Thanks for coming, I began, skipping pleasantries. I've considered your request. My answer is no. I'm not offering the lake house, under any circumstances. My mother's face crumpled. But where do you expect us to go? Somewhere within your means, I replied, voice even. That's a decision you should have made before giving away your residence. There are places, I added, sliding a folder across the table, affordable options, especially outside the city. I've included listings that fit your budget. There's Also information about communities with senior-oriented amenities that could be helpful. We're not elderly, my mother objected, pushing the folder away. We're your parents, just going through a temporary adjustment. A situation you created, I reminded her. By voluntarily giving up secure housing and assuming I'd absorb the fallout. My father leaned forward. We raised you better than this. Family helps one another. Exactly. I covered your bills for 5 years. I stepped in every month. I made sure you kept that roof over your heads. I handled medical costs, repairs, even groceries. And then you handed all of it to someone else like I was never involved. He sat back, frowning. Your name was never on the deed, he muttered, but my name was on every transfer slip, every repair invoice, every statement for 5 years. I maintained my posture, unwavering. The lake house is mine. My decision stands. I won't revisit this topic again. And unless you're prepared to have a real conversation, one that includes acknowledgement and accountability, I won't be engaging further. My father's composure broke. So that's it? You're cutting off your parents over money? This isn't about finances. This is about respect, consideration, being treated like an equal member of the family instead of an open wallet. For 20 more minutes, the conversation circled familiar themes, emotional appeals, guilt-laced platitudes, deflections. They downplayed my experience, insisted on blood loyalty, and tried to reframe their choices as standard parental decisions. I stayed calm. I reiterated my terms, and then I stood. This is my final decision. I sincerely hope you find suitable housing. Later that night, the backlash began. Melissa called from an unknown number, clearly circumventing the block I'd placed weeks earlier. Melissa's voice, sharp and quivering with indignation, lashed through the phone. She accused me of turning our parents out and resented what she called my bitterness over her happiness. I barely got a word in before she snapped, Brandon and I would never do this to our family, and hung up. Shortly after, the ripple effect spread like wildfire. My parents had clearly distributed their polished version of events to the extended family, framing themselves as victims and painting me as the ungrateful child. Suddenly, aunts and uncles who hadn't called in years began sending passive-aggressive messages questioning my integrity and reminding me of what family means. Cousins I barely recognized posted cryptic updates about loyalty and supporting aging parents, clearly aimed at me. I responded once, and only once. I sent a single, comprehensive group message to all extended relatives. I laid out the timeline of financial contributions I had made over the past 5 years, monthly housing payments, property taxes, renovation bills, utility expenses, and emergency health costs. I detailed the quiet understanding that I was securing my place in the future ownership of the home. I explained how, without notice, the property was transferred to Melissa and Brandon, erasing years of investment without so much as a conversation. I ended the email with a polite but firm request for privacy, adding that I would not entertain any further commentary on the situation. Then I blocked numbers. I muted social media feeds. I drew a digital curtain between myself and the noise. The emotional impact was real. But with each day that passed, the fog of guilt and betrayal began to lift. I started seeing the family dynamics for what they had always been, imbalanced and quietly corrosive. For the first time in my adult life, I was protecting myself instead of bending under someone else's burden. 2 months slipped by with little direct contact. Through occasional updates passed along by acquaintances, I learned my parents had signed a lease for a modest 2-bedroom unit in a neighborhood not far from where they used to live. Melissa, meanwhile, had noticeably tapered off her enthusiastic home renovation content. The flashy posts had given way to silence, hinting at the reality of homeownership setting in. In contrast, my life took on a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I began spending long weekends at the lake cottage, a retreat that felt more personal and precious than ever. I reconnected with friends I'd sidelined during my years of family prioritization. I enrolled in art workshops. I joined a book club. I even dipped a toe back into the dating pool, something I hadn't allowed myself time or energy to consider in years. Therapy, once focused on damage control, evolved into something deeper, rediscovery. Patterns from my upbringing began surfacing: overfunctioning, blurred boundaries, chronic self-neglect. Naming these habits gave me power over them. Professionally, things soared. In September, I landed a career-defining listing, an architectural conversion of a historic estate into upscale condominiums. The commission alone would significantly boost my annual income. The opportunity reaffirmed that turning inward had been the right choice. I was thriving then. In mid-October, as golden leaves blew across the Chicago sidewalks and I finalized marketing plans in my office, my assistant knocked gently. "There's a Richard Williams here," she said, voice soft. "No appointment. Says he's your father." My heart stuttered. I considered saying no. But something in her eyes gave me pause. What's his demeanor? I asked. She hesitated. A little anxious. Maybe remorseful. He said he understands if you're unavailable, but hoped you'd consider lunch. The fact that he came in person piqued my curiosity. My father typically avoided face-to-face confrontation. If he'd made the effort, it meant something. I nodded. Tell him I can offer 30 minutes. If necessary, we'll continue over lunch. He entered quietly, his presence dimmed from the polished confidence I once associated with him. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his once perfect grooming a little lax. Lines creased his forehead that I didn't remember being there before. In his hands was a small paper bag. Your mom's brownies, he said with a sheepish smile. She remembered they were your favorite. I acknowledged the gesture with a nod but didn't open the bag. I gestured toward the visitor's chair. Instead, this is a surprise. He sat, his hands fidgeting, an uncharacteristic gesture. I've been trying to reach out for weeks. Wasn't sure you'd take my calls. Things haven't exactly been normal since the wedding, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. His sigh was deep. I came to apologize, Heather. I mishandled everything. And I'm here to take ownership of that. The directness threw me. My father had a long history of dodging blame, preferring to twist narratives to justify choices. I didn't interrupt. I let him continue. The way we dealt with the house? It was wrong. You should have been involved in the conversation. You earned that, and we ignored it. Then we made it worse by refusing to acknowledge your contribution. Why? I asked quietly. It was the question that had haunted me for months. He looked down at his hands. The simplest answer is that your mother drove most of it. I should have stopped it, but I didn't. He took a long breath and launched into an explanation I'd never expected to hear. He told me how my mother had always seen Melissa as the embodiment of her unrealized dreams. Melissa's lifestyle, her engagement to Brandon, the connection to his influential family, these were seen as achievements, trophies. The house, according to him, became a chess piece to secure her social standing. She believed, he admitted, that giving them the home would signal our status to Brandon's family. A generous gesture that proved Melissa came from a respectable, giving background. And you went along with it, I said, voice measured but firm. I did, he admitted, voice unsteady. That's entirely on me. His eyes glistened. I've spent decades sidestepping confrontation with your mother, even when that meant dismissing you. That's not new, it started when you were still a child. I lacked the strength to stop it. The words struck me like a quiet thunderclap, both painful and affirming. Every buried suspicion about unequal treatment, every moment of feeling secondary, it hadn't been paranoia. It had been reality. Intentional, ongoing preference masked as parental judgment. So why now? I asked, watching him closely. Why apologize after all this time in silence? He took a deep breath. A few things. Living in that cramped unit has made me reflect on what we lost, and what we took from you. Brandon and Melissa are already encountering major issues. Makes me wonder what we gave all that up for. He paused, then added, I've started seeing a therapist. Alone. It's helped me understand patterns I never questioned before. He reached forward, stopping just short of my hand, a gesture heavy with restraint and meaning. I don't expect instant forgiveness, Heather. What we did hurt you deeply. But I need you to know I finally see that. And I'm trying to change. Our lunch afterward didn't feel like a typical family meal. It felt like dialogue with a man I'd never met. He asked about my goals, my hobbies, even my weekend routines, topics he'd previously ignored. He shared how he was taking on small consulting gigs and participating in social events solo, developing autonomy he'd never claimed during his marriage. Eventually, I broached the inevitable question. What about Mom? Does she see it like you do? His face tightened. Not really. She admits we made mistakes, but believes the actual choice was right. She's having a hard time coping with how it's all turned out. And with the distance from you, I can't go back to anything that doesn't acknowledge what was broken. I know, he nodded. I'm working on her, but whether she follows is up to her. I'm here because I need to repair the damage I caused. We agreed to reconnect over lunch once a month. No promises. Just a cautious step toward rebuilding something real, at a pace I could control. Watching him leave, back straight, steps firmer than when he'd arrived, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in months. Tentative hope. 2 weeks later, my mother reached out, not with vulnerability, not even with apology, but with a formal invitation to dine at one of her favorite upscale spots. I accepted, but made my expectations clear. No financial talk. No guilt about family duty. Just conversation, within firm boundaries. She arrived perfectly polished, her outward presentation untouched by recent turmoil. Her greeting was warm, but calculated. No hug. No apology. Your father says I should acknowledge the misunderstanding over the house, she began once we'd placed our orders. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I corrected quietly. It was a breach of trust. One that erased everything I'd done to help you. Her lips pressed together. Perhaps we didn't handle it transparently. And for that, I apologize. The phrasing was technically correct, but the emotion behind it rang hollow. Throughout the meal, she stuck to her version. The decision to transfer the house was justified, the rollout merely clumsy. She acknowledged that I had felt hurt, without ever taking ownership of causing that hurt. As dessert arrived, she said. With finality, all families experience turbulence. I'd like us to move past this. It wasn't the heartfelt mending I had hoped for, but it was something. A flicker of effort, however filtered, meant there was room to cautiously rebuild, on my terms. I could meet her halfway, without stepping back into old roles. Meanwhile, cracks in Melissa's idyllic world began surfacing. The constant flow of interior makeover posts on social media abruptly stopped. In their place came cryptic captions about navigating unexpected challenges and embracing growth. Through acquaintances, I heard whispers about loud arguments during dinners. Brandon was spotted at a charity gala, without Melissa, standing unusually close to a woman identified as his ex-girlfriend. I drove by the house one evening. The once immaculate exterior now looked unkempt. Chipped paint curled off the shutters. Flower beds overrun with weeds. A damaged gutter dangled loosely, ignored. The home I'd maintained for years with careful investment was deteriorating before my eyes. I felt no triumph. Just confirmation. My decision to walk away had been rooted in something real. Soon after, over coffee near my office, my father gave context. Brandon's family business is being audited. There are allegations of improper accounting. It's affecting them financially. I sipped in silence. Melissa thought Brandon's parents would bankroll everything, the remodels, the upgrades. But with this investigation, they've pulled back. Now she and Brandon are overwhelmed with bills. That's unfortunate, I replied evenly. He leaned in, voice lower. Your mother is finally seeing it, too. The illusion she built around Melissa's marriage, the security, the future, it's unraveling. She's beginning to realize what she sacrificed. And for what? Now she was forced to witness the collapse of everything she'd prioritized, recognizing, finally, that her sacrifices came at the cost of our bond. That realization explained the unexpected voicemail she left the following Thursday, her voice cracking beneath barely concealed tears. She asked if we could speak once more. Our next conversation remained guarded, careful, measured. Still, it included something I hadn't heard before, an actual admission of harm. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by helping Melissa feel secure, she said, eyes lowered. But I didn't want to see how that decision affected you. I'm genuinely sorry. I had replayed that sentence in my mind for months, imagining how it might sound, expecting it to be transformative. Yet, hearing it out loud brought a complex blend of feelings. Gratitude, yes, but also a sharp understanding that forgiveness wouldn't come with words alone. Healing, if possible, would take time. Still, her apology cracked open a long-sealed door. The possibility of a renewed connection, built on respect instead of exploitation, began to emerge. Half a year after the wedding that shattered every illusion I held about family loyalty, I stood in the foyer of my new home in Lincoln Park. A stately 3-bedroom Victorian, restored to reflect a harmony of tradition and modern comfort. Every detail, from the deep amber walls to the restored banisters, carried my imprint. This wasn't just property. It was a declaration. I would build a legacy for myself, on my own terms. The down payment came from my commission on the historic condo project, an assignment that exceeded every forecast. The sale catapulted me into a senior partner role at my firm, accompanied by increased income and industry recognition. The lake retreat evolved too. Previously a side project for rental income and occasional downtime, it had become a haven. Weekends turned into week-long stays. I created a private workspace there, curated a design scheme reflecting my personality, and cultivated genuine relationships with the locals. No longer a passive investment, it had become a meaningful extension of my life. Perhaps the greatest change, however, unfolded in my social world. Without the constant weight of family expectations, I found space to nurture friendships. Rachel and I expanded our circle to include peers who shared our values, people who celebrated growth, supported ambitions, and never demanded sacrifice as proof of love. I re-engaged with professional organizations I'd once sidelined, developing a network of colleagues who saw and respected my contributions. Weekly therapy continued as well, transitioning from triage to deeper personal exploration. I confronted long-standing habits, overfunctioning, emotional suppression, reflexively prioritizing others. Slowly, those insights translated into action. Firmer boundaries, clearer communication, permission to receive rather than only give. My relationship with my father became structured, manageable. Monthly lunches became routine. He stayed committed to therapy and began showing genuine curiosity about my life. We shifted away from parent-child dynamics and toward an adult rapport grounded in mutual respect. Things with my mother progressed unevenly. After her tearful voicemail and initial apology, her willingness to dig deeper faltered. She still resisted acknowledging the years of favoritism and deflection. Our contact remained occasional, short calls and quiet lunches, with rules about what subjects were welcome and which remained off-limits. That distance, while occasionally difficult, protected my progress. Communication with Melissa stayed minimal. Months passed before she texted, proposing coffee. The exchange was civil but lacked introspection. She acknowledged that I had a right to feel hurt but didn't take responsibility for her role in the situation. We settled into polite, distant civility, an exchange of brief messages on birthdays and holidays, nothing more. Her marriage, like her social media feed, began unraveling. Public posts shifted from triumphs to vague expressions about personal challenges. Friends mentioned mounting tensions. Brandon's family troubles intensified, triggering financial strain and emotional distance. The once coveted house became a source of stress. Upkeep became burdensome. Resale wasn't feasible without admitting defeat. The facade crumbled in real time, visibly and metaphorically. Then, one unexpectedly mild April afternoon, I received something I didn't anticipate. A long, thoughtful email from my mother. This wasn't her usual tone. Not the guarded politeness or performative concern. This was reflective, self-critical, sincere. She wrote of patterns inherited from her own childhood, mistakes repeated unconsciously, love expressed through control. She acknowledged the favoritism she'd practiced, the emotional costs it inflicted, and, most strikingly, recognized the house transfer as a deep betrayal. I told myself it was the right choice for the family, she wrote. But really, I was preserving an illusion of what I wanted our family to be. That illusion cost me you, and that's a price I now realize was too steep. She ended the email with a proposal. Family therapy. Not to erase the past, but to understand it, repair what could be saved, and change what needed to be different moving forward. I discussed it with my own therapist before responding. With careful optimism and firm personal guidelines, I agreed to one session, just one. For now, the initial therapy session exceeded my expectations. Guided by a skilled professional, my father expanded upon insights from his personal counseling, offering reflections with a depth I'd never witnessed before. My mother, to my surprise, remained quiet, not out of dismissal, but in genuine receptiveness. For the first time in my life, she didn't interrupt, reframe, or deflect. I spoke openly, voicing feelings I had buried for decades. There was no outburst, no rage, only clarity. We left that session with specific tools, communication practices, reflection prompts, and an agreement to continue meeting regularly. Healing didn't happen in one conversation. Some weeks brought meaningful progress, moments of shared truth that felt like fresh air after a storm. Other times, we slipped back into familiar grooves, requiring our therapist to gently steer us forward again. Still, momentum grew. My parents began acknowledging the true weight of their choices. I, in turn, started seeing the nuance behind their behavior, not excusing it, but understanding that their decisions were shaped by fears, insecurities, and unhealed histories of their own. Together, we constructed new ways of interacting, frameworks rooted in respect and guided by clear emotional boundaries. Outside that room, my personal world expanded in unexpected ways. Through a colleague's casual introduction, I met Jake Thompson, a photographer specializing in architectural design. His profession complemented mine in ways that felt both natural and enriching. But beyond shared professional overlap, Jake offered something even more valuable: calm steadiness. From the beginning, our connection was honest. No games, no overpromises. We communicated clearly about priorities and responsibilities. He respected my time, supported my ambitions, and never pushed for more than I could give. When I described my family situation and the delicate line I was walking between rebuilding and protecting myself, he simply nodded. He, too, had navigated complicated family terrain and understood the emotional toll it could take. Jake's own experience made space for empathy, but it was his relationship with his parents, balanced, direct, warm, that gave me a model I hadn't seen in action before. Watching him interact with his family was like observing a language I was learning for the first time: respectful disagreement, unconditional support, love without transaction. By the time December arrived, 18 months after the wedding that fractured everything, we had established something resembling a new rhythm. That year, holiday dinner was hosted at my home. Not my parents' modest rental, not Melissa's once celebrated residence. My place, a neutral ground neither loaded with history nor expectations. The evening was understated, intentionally so. Exchanged gifts were small but meaningful. No grand gestures, just honest appreciation. Conversation remained within comfortable lines, steering clear of any subjects that might reopen old wounds. Melissa and Brandon were there. Their dynamic was tense despite forced smiles. The home that had ignited so much conflict was now quietly listed for sale. Rumors of unpaid contractors, unresolved debt, and arguments about budgets had begun surfacing. Their marriage, built on appearances and assumptions, appeared to be crumbling under pressure. Neither had anticipated. No one stated the obvious, but I caught my father's eye across the table. He gave a slight nod, an acknowledgement of truths finally seen, of consequences finally understood. It said more than any words could. Reflecting on the long path from betrayal to cautious reparation, I realized the house had never really been the issue. It merely exposed dynamics that had festered for years. Uneven standards, emotional neglect, expectations that dismissed my autonomy in favor of Melissa's comfort. The crisis forced conversations we might never have had. It brought pain, yes, but also permission. Permission to question, to change, to demand better, and in that space, I learned the most vital truth of all: real family cannot be bought with checks or sustained through silent resentment. Authentic connection is built on seeing each other fully, not for what we provide, but for who we are. It requires hard conversations, earned trust, and the courage to rewrite the script, no matter how long it's been in place. My decision to provide financial assistance to my parents had fostered a false sense of emotional closeness, one that disintegrated the moment our interests diverged. It took a painful unraveling for me to understand that true intimacy cannot be built on obligation alone. One of the most powerful lessons I took from this experience was that drawing firm lines isn't an act of selfishness, it's an act of self-preservation. By defining exactly what behaviors I would no longer tolerate, I created the conditions necessary for real healing, not just surface-level harmony. These boundaries became a structure that protected me while still allowing contact. They gave us a framework to rebuild trust, not through blind forgiveness, but through mutual accountability. And that balance proved beneficial for everyone involved, even when it felt uncomfortable at first. Perhaps the most transformative realization came from understanding that standing up for myself didn't mean cutting others down. Self-respect can coexist with empathy. I could hold space for the pain my parents caused while still choosing to extend measured compassion. Acknowledging the damage was necessary, but so was recognizing that their actions stemmed from generational patterns, personal insecurities, and their own unresolved wounds. That complexity allowed me to seek healing, not revenge. As I move forward, I no longer live by inherited definitions of duty. I design my relationships with clarity and care. I've come to realize that just because people are family doesn't mean the relationship is permanent or unconditional. All bonds, familial or otherwise, require regular nurturing, honest dialogue, and mutual respect to survive. Automatic loyalty, without accountability, is not love. It's a trap. This new mindset touches every area of my life. With friends, I no longer overextend myself just to maintain appearances. At work, I advocate for what I've earned instead of waiting for others to notice. In potential romantic partnerships, I express my needs directly without apologizing for them. Slowly but surely, I've stopped abandoning myself to earn someone else's approval. That's not to say the journey has been seamless. Family gatherings still present triggers. There are still moments when I find myself slipping into old roles, tempted to shrink my truth for the sake of temporary peace. But I'm learning to pause, reflect, and choose differently. The dynamic has shifted from unspoken obligation to reciprocal engagement, where all parties are responsible for their words and actions. If you're reading this and nodding along, maybe it's time to examine the implicit rules you've been living under. Are your sacrifices appreciated, or just expected? Do you give from a place of love, or because you fear what will happen if you don't? Do your closest connections help you thrive, or subtly hold you back? Asking these questions is the first step toward change. And while the answers may lead to difficult conversations, they can also open doors to healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Sometimes, we need distance to see the full picture. And sometimes, the boundaries we set today are the bridges to better futures. Have you ever been caught between guilt and growth in your family? What unspoken rules have shaped your choices? Have you had to draw difficult lines to protect your peace? If this story helped illuminate similar patterns in your life, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into healing, resilience, and the hard, but rewarding, work of personal transformation. Remember this: choosing yourself isn't an act of betrayal. It's an act of liberation. And it's how real connection begins, with honesty, intention, and the courage to change the narrative. Thank you for walking this path with me.